You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that it's funny. So back to your analogy of team sports, I actually kind of think differently about it because I think I think of it very much as team sports, but team sports. Like you have
We're all the same team.
exactly, but you have specialties, right? You have a quarterback, you have a receiver, and the quarterback cannot do what the receiver does, and vice versa. And so a receiver would be fucking moronic to be like, "I'm sorry, QB, no shine for you. You don't get to play today. Just me, because I don't want like I can't do what you do, and I will do better what I do with you back there, right?" And so when people see Pizza on Demand coming and they go, "Oh, well, how's that affect my coaching offer? Are you doing this?" Because when you mention like someone has to lose, no, people will lose. The people trying to compete directly with Pizza on Demand will lose. That is, I am headstrong that direction. Like that, I want that to happen because that means our product is better. That means that we've marketed it better, that we've built something better, we've garnered a community. But I don't want to make every other fitness company lose or starve. I want them all to get better because then the industry gets better, like we talked about yesterday. So it is team sports. I think that people look at this very much more like almost like solo sport, golf, wrestling, where like I have to be the only one. No one else can do this. And also, I don't care what anyone else does. If I'm a 171 and I win state, everyone else on my team can fucking lose and I can still win state. And I actually look better, honestly, if I'm the one carrying the team and I'm the one giving team points. So I think that there's definitely a contrast in mentality, and it's profuse in the fitness industry, and it's very interesting because you think there are really easy ways where you're like, hey, like you can leverage this. Like anytime I talk to someone, I'm always thinking about, okay, what is this interaction? How's it going to be a net like positive to my life? Are they going to be a dope friend, someone I can talk to about, esoteric things that they and I have interest in? Is there a business alignment? Is there something that we can kind of compound on where we can both push each other forward and get, more money, more success, more ease? Like that's always going, like, I don't immediately go, how is this person going to step on my toes? And I feel like that's how the industry seems to think.
Well, I think sticking with sports analogy is interesting because you mentioned football and you mentioned like solo sports. I actually think that the best analogy is basketball because basketball is a team sport, but statistics are generally zero sum. And what I mean by that is if you score points, someone else on your team's not scoring points.
Right.
You get a rebound or an assist, someone else isn't. In football, typically there are multiple stats that can come out of any good thing. Same thing in baseball, right? Like baseball's much less stat oriented. It's like, I'm going to collect a ton of stats today. Basketball definitely can be. And whenever you're looking at a box score, you generally are understanding that basketball, one person can do a ton.
Yeah.
In football, even the best quarterback, even if the quarterback is like, 400 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, all this shit, they still need a line. So like the assumption is built in there that the line had a great game, or the receivers had a great game, right? So I think that in a lot of senses, this is a lot like basketball, where ultimately we can all be on the same team, and it's like who's the opponent, right?
Right.
Like who are we up against? Because I do think that there needs to be almost like this this external competition to where it's like, in a sense, us against them, if you are going to bring it back to like the sports analogy. But to be honest, I don't think that if we're looking at the fitness industry as a whole, I don't think that there is an enemy or there is an opponent, right? Because if everybody works together, then it is positive sum and we all win, our clients win, everybody gets healthier, everybody gets in better shape, we all make more money, we make our lives easier. So maybe like you just have to create this phantom opponent, like Michael Jordan style.
Yeah.
Going back to like, again, like the analogy there, I think you have a lot of Kobe's, people that think that they're Kobe's, right? But you don't have enough role players because everybody wants to be a Kobe. But if you get a Shaq on your team, then a lot of friction starts to come up and people always want the ball. So if you're working within a dynamic, I mean, let's just say fitness industry, right? Like you can have like a Mike Israetel, but Mike Israetel and Lane Norton are never going to work together.
Right.
Because you can only have one superstar, right? but you need a lot of role players. And I think no one really wants to be a role player. Like no one sets out in the fitness industry to be a coach, to be a role player. But you need role players, people who are going to be like just the fucking defenders that get 3 steals and 2 rebounds but don't score a point. Like you need someone who's to get a ton of assists. You need someone who's able to be like the Chris Bosh on the big 3 that just like sacrifices his stats to be on a team that's good. But ultimately, like there's not enough thinking along those terms to understand like sometimes you can sacrifice for the good goal. But really, I think that like there is going to be something that forces the issue. And I know this is something that we've been talking about where no one really wants to do things differently, especially if they're quote unquote working for themselves, right? They might not be working for their clients, but if you're making money and there's no external pressure or impetus for you to do anything different, you're just going to continue sitting on your hands and making money and not really worrying about much else. But if there is something that comes along, like let's just say, we talked about this before, like a coach is very good and offers their services for half the price of yours, then you're fucked, right? Because if people are comparing the same value, or I guess like the same service value, but one costs 50% less than the other, it's like, okay, this is right. Like if Mercedes and BMW both came out with the exact same car, but BMW was way cheaper, everyone's gonna buy the fucking BMW, right? Like no one cares about brand recognition that much to where they're gonna completely sacrifice their wallet. So, I mean, I know that this was not the topic we were gonna talk about, so we can transition here.
We'll transition, yeah.
But ultimately, I do think that it is gonna be good for the fitness industry, like some of the things that are going to be happening. To consolidate a lot of like the talented people and people that are actually good and know what they're doing, coaches that truly want to help people versus just extract money and be kind of like parasitic on the industry, which there are a lot of those people who like get into coaching because they want to make quick money because they've been told that this is an easy industry to make quick money. And I hope that a lot of that stuff starts to get filtered out. And again, like a lot of the talented people that want to work hard, that are very ambitious, that are very dedicated to like the goal of, making people fitter and healthier, improving like people's longevity and quality of life. Like I would hope that over time that starts to filter to the top. And I'm not going to hold my breath on this, but like, I do think that a lot of like trends are pointing towards like people needing to collaborate at a certain level and to a certain degree, maybe not like, super intimately, but at least marginally so that everybody can be better off. And again, it's like a positive sum relationship on the industry, but also for like clients.
No, for sure. The synergistic approach, right? I mean, you have a Dwayne Wade and a LeBron who made it work. You have a Kyrie Irving and a LeBron that made it work. And obviously they didn't run their full careers together, but there are opportunities where you're like, hey, like there are edge cases where you're better here and I'm better here. And being able to recognize that. And even back to your analogy of Chris Bosh or Kevin Love taking back seats, taking back seats to, be on a better team. Kevin Love is a champion. Yeah. Chris Bosh was a 2-time champion. Both are Hall of Famers. Like when it's all said and done, like they're both good. Like they're good and probably better off than if Chris Bosh had just stayed in Toronto or Kevin Love had stayed in Minnesota. So I think when you can look 30,000 foot view, when you can zoom out and see that the idea of role player, people think role player and they think interchangeable. I could be anybody. I'm like, I think Manu Ginobili, Derek Fisher, Robert Horry, like these guys were not replaceable. They just weren't the quote unquote guy, but Iguodala, like you don't win without these guys, right? And so really like just taking a second, taking that in, I think is important, probably just a overarching lesson for everybody. But like you said, transitioning, speaking of I think it was good. Speaking of things changing, right? Like industries needing to change, especially on a mass scale, societal scale, governmental scale. We'll talk a bit about MAHA, Make America Healthy Again.
Happy.
You said what?
Make America happy again.
Make it happy again. Put a smile on you. Is that the McDonald's theme song? I think that is the McDonald's theme song, or it was at one point in time, which is appropriate. Either way. So Bryce and I spoke a little bit yesterday about this, and it's been a hot topic. Obviously, lots of online discourse, some informed, some not. So I actually did take the liberty of further informing myself and having arguments with my language models just to make sure that I was seeing everything and prepared for this. But you heard a bit about how I feel, and I'll tell the audience here in a bit, but what's your take on everything, your understanding of what is to come or what is hoped to come, and where do you see opportunity? And then opportunity for it to succeed, and then opportunities for it to even be better.
I'm going to do my best to stay relatively narrow in my answers and in scope here, because this is a pretty broad topic, obviously. So I'll start off first. It's pretty apparent that America has a, that's pretty straightforward. You don't have to look very far to see the results of America's health. Most people are overweight. Most people are in some capacity dealing with symptoms, syndromes, autoimmune deficiencies, things like that, maybe a few generations ago weren't problems, or in other areas of the world are not problems, right? America does have specific America problems. The question then is, what is causing these problems? Why is America's obesity rate so much higher than in other parts of the world? Why do we deal with certain deficiencies or certain allergies at greater rates than other areas of the world? I'm not going to get into specific stupid shit like autism and all of that stuff, because that's honestly, there are very easy explanations for stuff like that don't require food dyes. But anyway, we'll continue. So preface everything that I'm saying with, America clearly has low-hanging fruit that can be improved. The difficulty is figuring out where these obvious issues are coming from. And it's not obvious that it's one place. And I think that's an issue with pointing fingers at specific ingredients or dyes or foods or food groups or whatever, that you're being overly reductionist for something that probably has tons of co-founding variables and lots of overlap and lots of correlations, but not necessarily causations, right? And a lot of this stuff we don't necessarily know and we don't understand very well. Human physiology, we don't understand hardly at all. If you pull one lever, 15 other levers freak the fuck out. And we just don't know. We don't have the data. It's impossible, or nearly impossible, to run all of the experiments and all of the simulations to understand how these things work. So that's, again, like a broad preface. What I will say, though, is I think that RFK is a little brain wormy for me. Not a huge RFK fan. But what I will say, though, is that I think the ideal here of like make America healthy again is a good goal to have. But you have to go about implementing that in the right way. And I think that immediately demonizing certain things is not the right way to go. My opinion here, I don't think that if we eliminate fucking, red dye or artificial dyes or artificial sweeteners from the American diet, I don't think all of a sudden things are just going to like solve themselves tomorrow. It's not that simple. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, So I think a more important question to ask is like, what can we do to create incremental improvements and progress towards the goal of making America healthy? And I think that's probably what we should start talking about and what this discussion can be about. But yeah, just broad preface is like, my thoughts here are people tend to focus on the wrong things all of the time. If you're someone who, for example, right, you're someone who is a bodybuilder who shoots a gram of trin in your ass. Bro, maybe you shouldn't be so concerned about whether there's fucking synthetic and artificial dyes in your food, right? Don't be a hypocrite. Don't be a hypocrite, right? Like, if you're worried about your health, then you need to be consistent across every domain, not just the ones that you find convenient or inconvenient, right? Or the ones aligned with your preferred lifestyle, you know? And another aspect of this too is like, it's very easy for people who are financially well off to demonize things that are cheaper to mass produce. Yet the reason that these things are mass produced in a cheap way was for a reason, because people used to starve to death. I know that we don't really know this because we're not exposed to it on a daily basis. But for anyone out there listening, yeah, famine, starvation used to be a fucking problem. It's not anymore. We solved it. You know why we solved it? Because we figured out a way to mass produce food and calories so that people just don't really starve anymore. It's not really a thing. And if it's a thing, it's because of corruption and bureaucracy more than humanity's ability to produce cheaper. So again, like contingent on all of that, I will say, yes, certain cheap food is probably unhealthy for mostly healthy people to consume all the good time. So if you're a young adult, you probably should not be drinking only Mountain Dew. It's pretty fucking obvious to me, right? Again, it's just basic adult decisions. You should probably be getting pretty good sleep every night. You should probably every once in a while stand up and walk around. You should probably every once in a while eat a fruit. These are pretty straightforward things. If you do those, let's just say 50% of the time, you're going to be healthier than most people. And I would say again, 90% of the population probably has better things to worry about than if there's artificial dye in their food. So that's where I'm going to start this. So I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, we're aligned there. So I actually did a pretty deep dive because I didn't want to misrepresent his action plan. It is actually pretty encompassing. I think like with most things, my largest issue is that the seemingly smallest, most minute, but most concrete and actionable pieces of something tend to rise to the surface, right? So people learn about intermittent fasting and digestion and circadian rhythm, and they go, oh, I need to stop eating by 6, and I need to be in bed by 8:30. But then as soon as they get up, they spike 2 full cups of like fucking coffee and rush to work half awake, like eat shit food throughout the day. Like there's a lot of other things before they start changing their nighttime hygiene to kind of really affect things on a much larger schedule, or a much larger, wow, I cannot talk, on a much larger platform for them. And so in MAHA, they do have places where they talk about like local initiatives and really trying to enrich food deserts and make sure that people have access. I don't think there's enough language or enough logic and I guess actually logistical and metric data on how they want to enact this, because I do think that those are the much larger pieces, right? They talk about education and we need to educate. And I'm like, yes, that is always my first place to start, is being able to educate people. But education without access does nothing. Like telling someone that red dye is bad for them, okay, cool. But if all the foods that are available to them in the time constraints that they have in their time poverty state that they're in, having, less than 10 to 15 minutes to dedicate to meal prep per day for their families, if McDonald's serves the need of making sure their kid doesn't starve that night or have, fucking sleep for dinner, then McDonald's it is, regardless of what McDonald's has in it. Would you rather have a child who is fed on additives and things that might not be great for them in the future, or a child that starves tonight? And everyone's going to choose the former. And I don't think that there's enough talk about that right there, right? When you talk about, we never talked much about like where you were from specifically near Houston. I think about just my life and the different places that I've lived. And when I lived in a majority white community, affluent community, lots of money, versus where I was born and spent the early part of my childhood, I could stare down a street in my childhood home and see Burger King, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Wendy's on the hill, and then I knew if you keep going up, there's a KFC, right? The closest grocery store, down that way, couldn't see it, couldn't throw anything to hit it. Long walk, but I could ride my bike to all the fast food places. Okay, cool. Also, money. My parents run around like food prep, that kind of time. It was ramen noodles at home, something in a microwave, or it was a dollar menu item from one of these places.
Well,
So,
I mean, not to interrupt you, but
no, you're good.
always complain about how the foods that you're allowed to purchase with food stamps are quote unquote junk foods. There's a reason for that. The reason for that is because they're calorie dense and they're cheap, which is the idea behind someone who cannot afford food. If we're subsidizing people's like calorie intake, think about it like that, right? Like we're paying for calories. That's what we want for people who are on food stamps. We don't want you to starve to death. So if you're being subsidized and you're getting government benefits for food, unfortunately, has to be processed, cheap to make, and calorie dense foods. So people are seeing the result of that be Doritos and shit like that, but they're not understanding why that is the case. I would agree that like we don't need food stamps to cover things like soda, right? Because if we want calorie density from our liquids, there are better ways of going about that, like juices, right? And juices are not super expensive. So, I mean, that's a very simple one that, yeah, that gripe is legitimate. But as a whole, it's not. Like, you have to understand what these things are in place for. So if you're someone who is like, fucking rich white kid that goes to an Ivy League school and you're seeing this and you're bitching about it, it's like, understand what the purpose is of these things. So, yeah, anyway.
No, yeah. So, and I was actually getting there. And I think that that's probably my biggest gripe is that having access to those things was good for us.
Yeah.
Without them, we would have been in a worse position. It's not a lack of education. It's that there are better schools. It's not a lack of food. It's just there are better and more nutritious access points in other places, right? So when you talk about how to really, really affect this at what I believe the largest level, it's trying to bring some sense and whatever you can in equity to what people have access to. And the more that you can subsidize that, the better off you'll be in the future. It's like, yeah, sure. Taking and paying teachers more money to teach at-risk schools, but providing better education has a long downstream effect. And maybe you don't make money on these teachers. Okay, cool. But you know what you do make money on the back end health effects, the behavioral problems you have in the youth. Like a lot of those things start to change, which is why they have those programs for teachers to go teach in at-risk areas and they get their loans forgiven or, so on and so forth. So when you sit there and you decide to subsidize the gyms, okay, yeah, maybe we pour a lot more money into this gym here or that there so that it's not a piece of shit. So people actually want to come there and use it, right? I think that those types of things really start to have positive downstream effects that you can then figure out, okay, on the back end, where are we saving money, right? As a government, being able to say, you know what?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, we can't go at McDonald's. We can't say, fuck you, McDonald's. You can only do this. You can only do that. But what we can do is we can offer favorable loans and grants to individuals who have found ways to make nutritious foods in under 5 minutes to compete with McDonald's, to make sure that, hey, you know what? As the American public, you can choose. So at the end of the day, when a child pulls up in the back seat of McDonald's and they see all the big burgers and the fucking toys, the last thing looking at is the fucking salad at the bottom. The salad that I mentioned is also triple the price of the fucking burgers. So
I also add this too, that people create associations with healthy versus unhealthy. And it's all about marketing. It's all about label, right? So I don't know if you saw this recently, but there was this trend that was going around. I mean, I'm a Twitter person. Yes, whatever. I'm not real like controversial on X. But there was a trend going around where people would compare like a double cheeseburger from McDonald's to all these other different foods that were marketed as healthy. Right. So like one of them was like a Lenny's and Larry's protein cookie, which it's a protein cookie. It's organic, or like whatever bullshit, right? And cheeseburger from McDonald's had better macros across the board. It had less fat, less carbs, more protein than this Lenny's and Larry's bullshit cookie. Like, people were comparing all of these different foods to a double cheeseburger from McDonald's. And dude, if you think about it, it's literally just protein, carbs, and fat. But I guess this kind of can transition into where we're going with the conversation in a moment. It's like, beyond the macronutrients, beyond the micronutrients, like, what else is happening here? Like, what are the actual, like, the chemicals that you're getting, the composition of these food groups and these ingredients. But no, I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people just have a jaded mindset around. It doesn't mean that you should be eating McDonald's all the fucking time, right? But it does mean that McDonald's burgers, they're not as bad for you as we've all been kind of led to believe just through years of propaganda, you know?
Yeah.
And again, it's like, should you eat other things that are more nutritious and micronutrients than McDonald's? Yes, of course, right? Honestly, if we're looking at big corporations like McDonald's, they have every incentive to not fucking kill their customers, right? So if people think that big fast food are actually trying to make people unhealthy or die or whatever, right? Like, there's no conspiracy, because if they make their customers fat and unhealthy, then that's a feedback loop where people are not going to want to continue going to McDonald's. If they kill them, well, they have no customers. You know what I mean? So the argument where I see the most validity to is like pharmaceutical companies being less motivated to actually cure issues versus just giving people band-aids and allowing them to continue paying for the band-aids over time. Because the incentives are misaligned there, right?
Yeah.
But going back to what you said, like, we do need to incentivize the right things across the board. So we are at a point now where we have solved, like, famine. We've solved starvation. These are not developed world problems. Developing world, still, maybe. Like, extreme poverty isn't really a thing in the world anymore, which is a fucking crazy thing to say. Like, if you look at the charts of extreme poverty over time, it is like the most drastic thing you could ever imagine. Like, a few hundred years ago, like 90% of the world lived in extreme poverty. Maybe not 5%. Now it's like 5%. It's insane. It's fucking crazy. And it's awesome, right? Like, we should be very happy about that. But there's something called the Kuznets curve. I think I mentioned it before, but you can use this to extrapolate essentially like anything that involves like technology or progress. And there's always this jump up where people are pushing really hard for fast technology, fast progress, fast problem solving. And that creates problems, maybe not as fast, but like almost in parallel with the problem solving, right? So industrialization. As we're solving all of these problems, we're automating stuff, we're building steam engines, we're, creating mass transportation. It's great. Well, we're also contaminating the environment. So we're creating problems as we're solving them. But you get to a point where people are wealthy enough and the problem that you originally sought to solve is mostly solved. So then you can dedicate a lot of energy and resources towards solving the supplemental or secondary problems that you created. We're at that point now with food. So solve the problem of starvation, of famine, of cheap alternatives, which is ultimately what we wanted, what we needed, right? We wanted to ensure that the poorest people in our populations were not dying because they did not have enough calories to eat. We solved that problem, right? Like, you can subsist on fucking a few dollars a day and continue living. Like, I mean, what is the most calorie dense food that you can imagine? That is calorie density combined with like cheapness, right? Like a unit of calorie per dollar, right? I'm sure you could probably get that down to like $1 a day to live, right? Like, which is fucking insane to think about. But we mostly solved that problem. So now we understand, okay, yeah, we've created other problems in trying to solve the bigger issue of people dying immediately. Now people are living longer, but they're a little bit unhealthier because of some of the things that we added into the foods in order to solve the problem of starvation. So now we can dedicate more resources, more energy, more attention towards going back, cleaning up some of the issues that we maybe created, and then continuing forward, right? But it's not necessarily that easy, but that's how these things work, right? Same thing with the environment. No, we're not all going to boil because of global warming. We're not. Like, that's just not going to happen. No, what's going to happen? We're going to solve the fucking problems. That's what humanity does. That's what humans do. We solve problems. Like, ultimately, right? So we're going to solve the environmental problems. We're going to solve the health problems that we've probably in a way kind of created. But I think that the way that we get about that is going to be the result of like really, really smart, creative people. And it's probably also going to be a function of things that we don't necessarily understand or have at the moment logically. So an example of this is like what I alluded to before when I was talking about like experimentation. It's very, very hard to run large scale experiments to understand the second order effects of changing things in diets, right? Because physiology is just too complex. So if we remove a micronutrient, or if we reduce a micronutrient, or if we remove an ingredient or whatever, right? We just don't yet have the ability to track that over decades of people's lives. And that's ultimately the timescale we're working at here. We're not working at like a single dose. If you one shot psilocybin, you understand what the fuck happens. It's pretty easy to measure that shit, right? It's really difficult to measure these things because they operate on very long timescales and over gigantic statistical spaces, right? Like it's not one person, one time. So because of that, it's very hard to measure. But ultimately, I think that this is where something like, I know we've talked about support, like AI, it's going to be great. If you can run simulations in virtual environments to simulate how this is going to work for 1 million synthetic virtual people over the course of 100 years, all of a sudden you have a lot of statistical data points to understand how these things potentially should work in normal human populations. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, I think I'm very concerned about fear mongering and demonization. Also just, I know how like the madness of crowds tends to work. And I know how groupthink works. And I know that it's really easy to point the finger at something or someone or some group of somethings or someone and focus all of your like vitriol at that thing and, you know, make that the villain, which is great if that's actually the villain.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not, then you focus on the wrong thing and you waste time, energy, money, and, you know, whatever the fuck is the result of you villainizing that thing or that person. So I think ultimately that's my concern with this, like, dye shit and like the artificial ingredients and all that stuff with the RFK. I don't know, like his little like MAHA witch hunt stuff that he's kind of like all about. But I also don't want to put my assumptions on him because I have not done my due diligence to look into his actual proposed policies. All I know is that I've, you know, listened to him on multiple podcasts. I've like listened to his speeches. And that's all I've been able to glean from him there. But I don't know, I know that you looked into this in more depth, so I'll pass it back.
Yeah, no, he does, and I want to reiterate this. He does have what seems to be an encompassing plan. And then I think just as a general skeptic of all politicians and people who work in politics, whenever something is vague, I go, oh, okay, well, we'll see. Like that, what are your metrics? Like, what are your plans? What are your actual benchmarks for success in said space, right? Which is, again, like it comes down to access to me. When you talk about getting into these places and changing people think. Speaking of just, I don't know if you remember when I did the trend, not the trend. I just started asking the question if people considered Gushers candy or snacks. And everyone, like, it was, people kept saying snack. And then I took Gushers and compared them to like Sour Patch Kids. And Sour Patch Kids had more favorable macros, less sugar. Like they were not as bad for you. Like they were pretty close. And my whole point was like, moms all over the country have been fooled into thinking that Gushers were good snacks to throw in their kids' lunches. So we grew up thinking they were fruit snacks, right? We grew up like, this is great. This is good for us. They're not Mott's. They're not the ones that are like real fruit, this and that, the ones that really try to push like their micronutrients. It was just fucking candy that we liked. And they called it a fruit snack. So we thought it was healthier than just giving our kids a fucking chocolate chip cookie, which it wasn't. So to your point of just perception, and now fast forwarding to where we are in the conversation when it comes down to the demonization of small pieces. Like, I'm sorry, mom in the suburbs, your kid's not probably unhealthy because of the red dye in their diet. It's probably the overload of sugar in their diet, or maybe just a lack of proper, structure and whatnot at home when it comes down to how they exert their energy and what they do in their daily life. Like, there are much larger
Mom that's worried about all this stuff and fucking health. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's like there are much larger rocks in their life. And I think that red dye gives humans the ability to do what we have such a strong tendency to do, which is be able to point the finger at someone other than ourselves.
I think people also fucking forget. I know we talked about this before as well. But yeah, we have red dyes in our food. Bro, a generation ago, motherfuckers had lead in everything. We're complaining. We have fucking a couple of dyes. They had lead. Like, that shit was eating their brains. And
yeah,
yes, again, lead is not good, but we ain't complaining about dyes, and we're saying that these are like the villains. These are the things that we could be going after. They're so bad for us. It's like, okay, if we're saying make America healthy again, healthy as compared to fucking what, bro? Like, why don't we make America healthy? Because we've never been fucking healthy. We used to be less fat, for sure, because people ate less.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think we talked about this before on a podcast about gym classes and the way they were before and the way they are now, right? And you talk about healthy again, it's like, well, there was definitely a stronger physical fitness presence when it came down to people just generally wanting to look, especially in the era of like just precursor to like Arnold Schwarzenegger and bodybuilding becoming this thing of like, yeah, like everyone should be trying to get fit. Everyone should want to be healthy. Runners and women coming into sports, like there was this boom in human activity, and that has since then subsided. And that is something that I think that we can't aspire to again. Like, hey, like let's get back to when we really encouraged our kids to move. Yeah, do we want to shame our kids into being bullied and whatnot in gym class? No. But having gym class be optional for kids growing up, I think sets a really bad precedent. Like, I get it. Like, you want to make sure it's inviting for everybody, but telling them, hey, like, I get it. You don't really want to take this class. You don't want to be in here because it makes you uncomfortable. So, like, go ahead, go sit on the bench or go to art or whatever. And it's like, it's not that there aren't other places this kid can, kind of really immerse themselves and, develop talents, but exercise should not be a thing that is deemed, at least in my mind, for kids, like optional activity. Like, I got a question the other day. I'm gonna make content about this, but I'll make a slight digression here on it. Someone asked if I would ever date someone who didn't work out. And in short, no. And I'm sure the people who don't work out regularly, they're like, oh, you shallow bastard. And I'm like, no, hold on. Workout doesn't mean like just the gym. Like, she could run, she could, be a gymnast, she could dance, she could do a myriad of things.
Yeah.
I don't work out anymore as a hobby. I work out like you brush your teeth. Like, it is a habit. It's how I live my life because it makes me live a better life and it sets me up for a future better life. And so if my potential partner doesn't view keeping their body that way, brushing their teeth like they keep their body healthy, then it's a non-starter for me, bro. Like that, and I think that that's how it should be looked at. And so I may be aspiring to that.
So
you said what?
It's a sign of conscientiousness. Like, really, it's like how ordered and structured are you as a human being? How well you like dedicate yourself to a goal or to a plan, to again just like structure and continue doing it. And I mean, ultimately, there is this aspect of like personal care, personal hygiene, and just respecting your body. I think most people place a high priority on, whether they say it or whether they don't. We talked about like body positivity. Yes, like I don't think people should be bullied for the way that they look. No, but I think that we should obviously prefer to be in a good body composition range. Like I like, and I hate to even say body composition because I think there's more to health than body composition. So like, bodybuilders have amazing body compositions, but they're not necessarily the most healthy people. So like, I'll just, I guess, broaden it to, we should incentivize and glorify what is healthy, what is the most healthy, what promotes longevity, what promotes quality of life, right? What promotes virility, like these are things that we should be wanting. So yeah, there are people who just got the short end of the stick and they are never going to look like me or you or, you know, our girlfriends or, a lot of other people who just have like good physiques. And that sucks. That's super unfortunate. Like, again, the world is not fair, but we do not have to pretend that there is some kind of like cosmic justice whenever we're talking about these things. The universe doesn't play by those rules. Some people have better lives than others, or they at least have an easier road to a better life, and the same thing goes for health. But I do think that we have become a culture of complacency. And I think that that kind of goes to your comment about like gym class and physical fitness. Is as Americans, we haven't really had an external enemy. So that's why you see us eating ourselves from the inside out now, is because we don't have anybody who's been able to challenge us on the global stage since the Cold War. And even then, it was mostly just a facade, right?
Yeah.
The Russians were never on our level. We could always fucking destroy them within seconds if we wanted to. Like it was always there. We were so far ahead of them. It was just more of like, again, like you need to Michael Jordan or something, create them so that you don't like self-destruct.
Well, it also instills an immense amount of nationalism when people feel like that strong us and them.
Yeah.
So it's like we're training our kids to make sure they can fight the Russians or the Chinese or whatever.
But yes, no one that's healthy, right? But I do. So like, I will draw the line and make a distinction between nationalism and patriotism. I think nationalism is mostly, right? Like, if you're a budding country, you should probably have a degree of nationalism to get to the point of being patriotic in your country, right? But nationalism, in my mind, connotes like an isolationist or almost like an ethnocentrism.
Yeah.
That doesn't want outsiders, but I don't think that's good, right? Like you should be welcome to outsiders, provided they're contributors. They're not just going to be fucking leeches. So this is a whole other issue that we could talk about at some point. We don't necessarily need to go into it right now. But I think that we have become a culture of complacency. And this is definitely very apparent whenever it comes to things like health. We have become spoiled by all of like the wealth and luxury and privilege that we all are exposed to on a daily basis. Like, again, probably, actually, this is a side point. Probably the funniest moment in recent history is you can draw almost a straight line between the collapse of communism and Boris Yeltsin, who was the president of the Russian Federation, kind of like as the Soviet Union was teetering. He visited America, and specifically, he visited at one point a supermarket in Texas, and he thought that it was a joke being played on him because of how abundant everything was, and how fresh everything was, how much food and how much variety there was at this supermarket in Texas. And he thought that it was a setup for a photo op. He was like, it's like, am I being fucking punked right now, And they were like, oh, no. There's another supermarket like this a couple miles down, and there's another one a couple miles down. They're all over the fucking place in America. And he was like, oh, maybe this isn't cool anymore, right? Americans know what they're doing. But there's like this photo of him in the supermarket looking at all this abundance. just mind blown, like just massive smile. But I think that as Americans, we've really gotten like so conditioned to that at all times, and because of that, there is this complacency of us not necessarily understanding how easy our lives kind of are in so many ways. So many ways. Yes, people have problems, and wealth and prosperity creates additional problems, or maybe not additional, creates different problems. Different problems. So again, as we solve one problem, big problem, we create additional problems. But then we solve those and we create additional ones. And it's like this branch that never necessarily stops, but they get smaller. They get smaller, right? So now people don't starve, but they're a little bit more unhealthy. People don't die in world wars anymore, hopefully. But the suicide rates are higher.
Mhm.
People make a ton more money overall, but loneliness is a bigger issue now, right? Or overworking, burnout, like those are issues. So again, we're solving problems slowly but surely. We're solving problems. So now it's just, okay, how do we move on to the next problem? How do we know which next problem there is to tackle? Also, how can we effectively mark a problem as solved enough to where we can move on to the next problem, right? So this is a completely separate point, but this is a point that I do want to make. There is big downside to continuing to focus on problems that are mostly solved. Like, there is a giant opportunity cost to doing that because you can't effectively transition your resources to continue to focus on the problems that need addressing whenever the problem that you set out to solve is mostly solved. You can just kind of keep it out of minutes, right?
Right.
So one good example of this is, I mean, again, kind of controversial, but equality, right? If we're looking at like human equality, especially in like Western countries, it is mostly solved. We don't have overt discrimination anymore, especially like in the workplace, in society. Like we don't have separate bathrooms based off of races. Like it's mostly a non-issue to how people just go about and experience their day-to-day lives, right? Yeah, it doesn't mean it's solved. It doesn't mean that people don't have racist thoughts. It doesn't mean that people aren't shitty sometimes. It doesn't mean that like the past is not in any way affecting the present, right? Like we understand these things, but if we're so focused on eliminating the 1% of racism that still exists, we can't effectively move on to the problems that demand our attention now, right? And I think honestly, that's where a lot of like my thinking comes with some of this stuff. It's like, no, it's not ever going to go away, but you need to understand when to move on to the next thing. We need to understand when this is like, all right, well, it's like we're good enough. Let's move on, right?
Well, there's a sunk cost at some point in time, right? In time, like when you're just like, okay, you know what? Like as a black man, I can sit there and go, okay, listen, like I know there are people out there who are just fucking dicks, and also I don't give that my time anymore because it's not massively impeding my ability to move forward with people who want to collaborate, who look different than me. And if I hyperfixate there, then my ability to move forward is then diminished, or my ability to move forward wholeheartedly is diminished. And the same thing can be said for diet, food. We talk about what we're doing here. It's like, okay, well, we gave people red dye, and we can definitely sit there and say sweet. But when you get that concretely removed from all diet, what do people do next? How does that problem, like it didn't create a new problem per se, except for maybe a problem of complacency. Like we won, we did it.
Yeah, too. So like, it will just move on to the next thing that's poisoning our kids.
Exactly. And I think that that's the big piece for me is when you talk about problems, and can you remind me of the name of the curve that you quoted earlier?
The Kuznets curve. Yeah.
Kuznets curve. So when you talk about that, the way I think about a lot of the problems that have been created as byproducts of solutions, a lot of those problems can then be solved more efficiently because we have solved said thing, right? So it's almost like the solution itself is, right, like
that's the whole principle is because we get to a point where the primary problem is solved, we can then move those resources to solving the problems that popped up as a function of solving the.
Yes. Well, I think even more so, I wanted to like really articulate this for the listeners. I think it's even less about, okay, I'm now in a better space. I have more time. I have more money. So now I can go and solve these problems, much as it is that I think that for a lot of these solutions, they're almost rolling right into natural solutions for the other things. Less about I have to refocus, but almost like, no, naturally, we get to solve this problem. Is the chronologically next lined up thing for us to solve because we have momentum in this direction already. And so when you talk about red dye, what does that give us momentum with? It lines with it starts to align us with the world and the just being more restrictive in our diets and what we have in our shit, because we know that the US is fairly lax on that. But when it comes down to momentum in something as severe as childhood obesity, do we gain momentum in solving the problem of fat kids? Do we gain the problem of solving kids who grow up to be obese adults with comorbidities and drains on the healthcare system? Like, we don't solve that with dye. And allowing people to fixate on that is just dangerous.
And another aspect of this too, as you mentioned it earlier, but like incentives, right? So like currently we are obviously incentivizing the wrong things at various levels of health, fitness, So yeah, like there definitely should be some aspect of, hey, make food stamps contingent on this, like contingent on you getting an annual health check, being under a BMI of this, right? Because if you're over a fucking BMI of 30 and you're on food stamps, clearly don't have a calorie intake problem, right? Things like that. Or I actually saw this, someone posted this the other day on Twitter X. They said something like, we should, like, what was it? RFK is going to make it so that people's tax rate that they pay is based on their buying back percentage. And I was like, wait a second, though. Like, here, like, what is that? Like, if you think about it like that, aligns incentives, right?
Yes.
So if we want a healthier country, legitimately, setting people's tax rate based on their body fat percentage would, for sure, lead to people being less fat. And granted, like, there are going to be other ways to get to that don't necessarily require something as crass, but like that's a good way of thinking about this stuff, is
Oh, yeah.
like what are they thinking about it? Like why does it not make sense just as a very easy level to give people tax breaks for being healthier? You get an annual checkup, your checkup, the doctor signs off on your health, you get a tax break, right? Again, it can be fucking some impartial doctor. It can be whatever. Maybe it's something a little bit more quantitative rather than just like, hey, you're good. Maybe it is something like, like that percentage. Maybe it is something like, cholesterol levels in a healthy range or anything like that, whatever, right? But like, why would you not then give people that are not a drain on the healthcare system a tax break?
Well, I
Right?
think you can even, and I'm big on, I think that we should reward achievement. We should reward people succeeding at said thing.
For
I
sure.
also am big on rewarding activity. So I think that if someone comes in and maybe their, BF percent is a little higher, but they are seeing a doc twice a year to make sure that they are preemptive in all care, like making sure that they're taking care of themselves. They're regularly working out in some sort of regimented way. If they are eligible for something like EBT and stuff like that, you can track what people buy. You can track how people prep their food and what they're doing. Like, submitting that kind of stuff, it might seem kind of painstaking. It might feel like Big Brother, but if you told someone like, hey, I give you a tax break. Hey, I'll give you this. I'll subsidize you here if you're doing X, Y, and Z. Well, all of a sudden you incentivize the activity that you want people to partake in. And I think that doing stuff like that is the direction we should go. Damn the like, oh, I'm free, you're impinging on my rights, or you're somehow isolating me. No, everyone can take part in this action. Everyone can go out and get 6,000 steps a day. Everyone can go out and make sure that they're drinking X amount of water per day. Like, those are things that everyone can do. So incentivizing that kind of activity and you just going, I don't want to do it because it feels like someone's telling me what to do. Okay, well then you don't get the break, bro.
It's like being an adult.
Yeah.
No, like just we can end this on something that I do think is very it's good. So I will say that the direction that a lot of this is going, I feel confident about, right? And a lot of people don't. And
It
that's
reminds me of Move. Move, remember the Obama administration, like Michelle Obama's Move? Yes, I liked that a lot for kids, especially.
but not even just the RFK stuff, and just like bringing more attention to very obvious issues that Americans are dealing with that are very seriously affecting the quality of health at a very broad level. But like even Elon and Vivek, they're like Doge initiative, right? Like government efficiency. So I'm a very firm believer that there should be very few, if any, of these three-letter agencies that are making decisions for the entire population with no accountability. So if you're making decisions on what we can and can't do, what we can and can't eat, what we can and can't consume, you better be making the right fucking decisions, especially if I don't get any input into that stuff.
Right.
And we better be able to measure your performance. We better be able to fucking fire you, get rid of you if you're doing a bad job, right? So a good example of this is like the FDA. The FDA fucking sucks, man. The SEC, they suck. They're horrible. They're not doing any good job of protecting people, right? There's no reason why a life-saving drug needs to be in development for a decade, and the pharmaceutical company have to spend billions of dollars just to get it to consumers. There's so much government bureaucracy that like this stuff needs to go. So ultimately, I'm optimistic that these initiatives combined to, again, shine a brighter light on the fact that Americans are very unhealthy. There are simple ways to make us very much not healthy, or not unhealthy, excuse me. But also like an initiative to make sure the government is more efficient and there is accountability at every level. I think these are ultimately going to be very, very, very good things if they go in the direction that, like, hopefully they will go. I'm not going to hold my breath. It is the government after all. But again, like the ethos there is, I do think, aligned with the direction that we should be going.
We should be healthier. And this is overall, like you said, a very good sentiment. So we will wrap up there. We want to hear you guys' feedback. We're sure that we're sure we missed some things. We're sure you have your own feedback, your own thoughts on this. So we want to hear it. Share it with us, share this with your family, and have an excellent Black Friday, because we just launched that today. So I know we're pushing it a little early, but yeah, come join.
Go buy our stuff.
Please.